Hello, and welcome to another episode of Now Who Would Have Thought? It was 6 o'clock, maybe a few minutes after. Mr. Prudent Allotte was walking towards his home in Amiens, France. A brisk wind was blowing up the valley. The shadows that would merge the day into the night reached with long fingers up the boulevard and towards the short path which led to his door. At the big door which opened from the inner court, he paused, fumbled for his keys. Suddenly a brilliant, blinding flash, the splintering of wood, a second resounding crack, burning pain seared his left leg. Not 10 feet away, Allotte saw the dark figure of a man, a pistol in his hand. He lunged. Allotte lunged towards the silhouette, grabbed the man. The two fell together to the ground. Servants ran screaming from the house. Allotte saw his wife's face in the semi-darkness. Then the pain stabbed through him again, and he passed out. When he opened his eyes, he was in his own bed. His wife, Honorine, was hovering over him. The doctor was beside her. Allotte's head was ringing from the effects of the morphine. His leg throbbed. He tried to speak. The light faded. A vibrating ball, like a flaming rocket, raced towards him, seemed to explode in a brilliant flash all about him, then recede into the darkness again, smaller and smaller, and once more merciful unconsciousness. Prudent Allotte died that night, even though he went on living for 39 more years. Up until then, he had been the world's most elegant dreamer. From that night on, nothing but nightmares. Allotte had an uncanny insight into the future. Uncanny. He saw automobiles and airplanes half a century before there were any, and balloons and submarines and electric motors and condensed foods. There was much talk now about moving pavements. We don't have them yet, but some are under construction. Yet he described them in detail over 100 years ago. And oxygen tents before doctors even knew what oxygen was for. And automation. We are just now catching up with where this amazing man said we would be. For half a century before men perfected radio, this man wrote about televisions. This Frenchman was a playwright by profession. In a broader sense, he was the world's first author of science fiction. What Victor Hugo had done for history and Alexandre Dumas had done for romance, this amazing fellow did for science fiction, before the term itself was even invented. More than anything, Prudent Allotte wanted to be remembered for this. He rose with the sun and worked through the day for 60 years to try to ensure for himself a place in literary history. However, the French Academy ignored his efforts. Any writer who was anything was accepted by the French Academy, but not Allotte. Perhaps his flights of fancy were considered unworthy of recognition. Technically, what he wrote was accurate in fantastic detail. Yet, it would take 100 years to prove that. So, Allotte was ignored by his literary contemporaries. Often his loving wife's heart was torn to hear him say, "The great regret of my life is that I have never taken my place in the literature of France." Allotte showered attention on his nephew, Gaston. Son of his beloved brother, the boy became a symbol of the youth Allotte knew would live to see his dreams come true. Then the French Academy would surely recognize the author of these predictions. Then young people like Gaston would revere the author who had seen the airplanes fly and the stairways move and all the rest. The boy Gaston returned the affection. In fact, the boy suffered more deeply than his uncle, because the recognition from the French Academy was withheld. I've tried to explain this uncle-nephew relationship to help us all to understand about that night in March in the Amiens. For when Allotte approached his home, the intruder with whom he grappled, the shadow by the gate, who fired the shot into Allotte's leg, turning his dreams into nightmares for the rest of his life. That shot was fired by his favorite nephew. The boy, mentally disturbed by the fact that his uncle was not recognized, had suffered his bitterness so long that some strange and twisted reasoning told him this was the way to win that recognition. After the shooting, as they took the boy away to the asylum, where eventually he died, he kept saying over and over, "Now Uncle will get the honor he deserves. Now he will be recognized." But that was not the way. The honor, which most assuredly would have been forthcoming, had been withheld to this day, due perhaps to the breath of scandal resulting from that night. Also, Prudent Allotte never wrote anything worthwhile again. The books which he laboriously, mechanically grounded out those remaining years of his life had been forgotten. But Prudent Allotte has been remembered. The man who died broken, crippled by the bullet which he carried to his grave, and bitter because of the tragic collapse and confinement of his beloved nephew, is remembered this year as another of his dreams comes true. His submarine, capable of remaining submerged indefinitely, has materialized. For Prudent Allotte was the name under which he traveled as he sought to lose himself those last tortured years of his life. For the genius in him had been destroyed by the nephew who wanted to make sure the world would recognize and remember his real name. You know him as Jules Verne. Now who would have thought? This is Chris McCrae. Take care of yourself and the ones you love most.